Among the vast amount of levels in Left 4 Dead lie many unsolved mysteries, and in today's video I aim to talk about a few of them. This is part 3 in this series, and you can check out the rest of the videos on my channel if you find this one interesting. But if you haven't seen my previous videos, don't worry, they don't have to be watched in any particular order. As always, if we hit 1,000 likes on today's video, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab, and for every 1 subscriber I gain from this video, I'll add 1 picture to that post, until YouTube stops me at least. I have a Discord community that you're welcome to join. I play very often with the people in there, and everyone's super chill. But with all that out of the way, let's begin. Throughout the events of Left 4 Dead 2, Ellis can go on and on about the events that have happened in his life, telling stories in situations where it might be better to stay quiet. But once you listen to all his stories, you begin to realize there's something deeper at play here, something more sinister. Ellis loves to constantly bring up a man known as Keith in his stories, so much so that there are even YouTube videos dedicated to the amount of tales Ellis has about Keith. From tattooing phrases on his forehead to receiving burns on 95% of his body, who is this guy? Why are all the stories Ellis tells about him strange? And is Keith even real? Well, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the tattoo story, where Ellis explains that on a dare, Keith tattooed the phrase "I am a moron" on his forehead for $200. A pretty strange thing to do, but nothing crazy or mysterious so far. Just keep in mind the strangeness of his actions described by Ellis and the amount of them. The second story I want to talk about is the time Ellis and Keith made fireworks. Nothing crazy until Ellis points out that he suffered third-degree burns on 95% of his body, even going as far as to mention the next city over were calling to complain about the smell of burning skin. The third story I want to bring up is the time Keith tried to deep fry a turkey, which got him burned again, but this time on 90% of his body instead of 95. An important distinction because this is a completely different story. I haven't even begun to scratch the tip of the Keith iceberg, but the 3 stories I brought up are very important in analyzing Keith as a character, but more importantly, Ellis. You have some stories like the tattooing incident which are believable, but Ellis will throw something at you like burning skin stories. In the first one, he said that the city smelt Keith's burning skin, which is quite literally impossible, so it makes me believe he's making up a lot of these stories, or at the very least over-exaggerating details of them. But if he was just over-exaggerating the stories, how come Ellis has 2 completely different burn stories? The details don't add up. There's one other story I want to bring up, and that's the time Ellis talks about killing zombies with Keith, but realizes that it's with our group of survivors, and then quickly shifts to saying that he can't wait to tell him about it. Not an insane revelation, but important in understanding Ellis's mental capacity. If he is mixing up stories he formed in the last couple of days, who's to trust his stories he claims actually happened years ago? Here's what I believe. Keith is a real individual who existed at one point in time. Ellis met Keith and made many real stories, some of which he tells to our other survivors, but a lot of these stories he makes up, either to seem cool or just for attention, but either way his stories end up tiring out and even irritating our other survivors. A lot of times they end up cutting him off at the end of his story. I don't think Ellis is trying to be malicious with his stories, rather he's just misunderstood by a lot of his peers. Like I said, there's so many stories I left out. If I missed any important story or you think there's more, let me know down in the comments. However, there's no concrete proof that Keith exists. We only have Ellis's stories to go off of. So Keith could just not exist. Is he real? Is he one big lie? A mystery that might remain unsolved forever. The Loch Ness monster of death toll might sound crazy, but give me a chance to explain. For those of you who haven't seen my first video, I talked about a sewer monster in Death Toll's second map, but what I didn't tell you is that I have another story just like that one. I played the first game when I was really young and had a super active imagination. Sometimes I would swear I saw things in games that didn't exist at all. Because of the nature of Left 4 Dead and the fact that it's a horror game, my imagination would run wild, which is why I have a lot of these stories. So don't take them as canon of course, but rather a cool campfire myth you'd tell your friends. Some of you might be asking, how is that even possible? Where could you possibly get a glimpse of this so-called Loch Ness monster? Well, if you travel all the way to the very end of Death Toll, our survivors hold out in a house that's near what seems to be a giant river or lake. After defending themselves from hordes of the undead, they're eventually picked up and taken to the next campaign. But I swear, every time I would arrive at the docks, I would catch a glimpse of what seemed to be some sort of Loch Ness. Something huge. It would never come close or reveal itself, always just out of reach. As I explained in my last video, I would always play the game on easy difficulty, so I assumed that there might have been enemies I just never came across. And if I loaded the game up on another difficulty, I would always be on edge. I know that's not the case now, but back then I was of course way more gullible. In an attempt to go out into the water and search for the creature, I would always try, but would get stopped by some sort of protective rope that sits on the edge of the water, something the developers added to block the survivors from actually killing themselves. There would be times where I never saw it, but then there would be multiple times where I caught a glimpse just before it tucked its head under the water. Sometimes it would be off screen in the final cutscene, or disappear whenever I looked directly at it. It's totally possible I watched some modded gameplay and just thought I saw something. Now that I'm older, similar to the Death Toll sewer monster, I know they're not actually in the game, but it was enough to make me believe it back then. The Loch Ness monster of Death Toll is just a figment of my imagination. Or was there something more concrete to it? I may never know, but keep an eye out the next time you play Death Toll. You might just see something you've never seen before. There are many strange campaigns in Left 4 Dead 1, but the one that sticks out to me as being the most unsettling is by far Blood Harvest. I mean, just listen to that name, Blood Harvest. Although the name is cool, I didn't come here to talk about the entire campaign, rather a set piece in the second to last map. Before we jump directly there, it's worth noting a lot of the strange scenes leading up to it for some potential context. Earlier in the level, the survivors pass by a barn and stumble across a pit of dead cows. Oddly enough, each and every one of their faces have been removed, not their entire head, rather all the skin and blood resulting in just the skull. Unfortunately, our survivors don't think too much of it and continue through the level without noticing anything is really wrong. That's until they make it to this one specific house right before the safe room. For a majority of the level, our survivors have been trying to follow the train tracks in an attempt to get to the military base, and that's no different in this chapter. As they follow the tracks, they realize there's a few derailed cars blocking their path, so they head down the nearby hill and walk beneath a house. And as they resume following the tracks, they stumble upon this very specific house I mentioned earlier. On the top are the words Ramsey, and next to the stairs lies some graffiti. If you just so happen to look to your right a little bit, you can spot a piece of furniture sticking out one of the windows. None of that compares to what our survivors find inside. As they open the door, they step on some blood, just to notice streaks of it all over the room, with the center of the room containing a giant thick pool of it. There's some sort of big bloody object, and next to it lie some body parts. If you played Blood Harvest from start to finish, you would have come across this scene. At first I thought it was a boomer. The object in the corner of the room looks like the lower half of a boomer once it explodes, and the streaks of blood on the floor and walls added to that assumption. However, something threw me off about the amount of blood. This isn't normal for a boomer, and while blood surely comes out when a boomer explodes, it's mostly bile. If you take a look at the object in the corner of the room again, you notice there's some blades, and if you look on the other side, you can clearly tell that this object is a lawnmower that happens to be propped up on a cinder block. It's pretty obvious to me now that whoever was living in this house was grinding humans up. Were those humans infected? Were they normal people? We may never know. But if you wanted to be hopeful, you could assume that they're infected, which would mean that the person here was grinding up bodies as they killed them. But something about that doesn't sit right with me. Why would you go through the effort of doing all this inside your house? If you were just killing zombies, wouldn't it be easier to leave them outside? If you didn't want the infected just lying around the outside of your house, you could just drag them into a pile and dump them somewhere. Why go through the effort of shredding them? I think it's more likely it was done for food. Next to the streaks of blood, you can find empty cartons of food, or what might have been some type of liquid. And if you search the rest of the house, you can find trash littered everywhere. My personal theory is that the person inside this house tried to stay here indefinitely until their food ran out, and in a desperate act of survival resorted to cutting up people for food, either other living people in the house or infected, but whatever the case is, somebody got grinded up. It's possible that this was done as self-defense, that maybe an infected wandered into the house and that individual had nothing but a lawnmower at the time. However, the fact that the lawnmower is propped up on a cinder block puts a wedge to this thought experiment, because that's a clear sign it was intentionally placed there and wasn't just used by accident. The cows from earlier could be a sign this person was doing crazy things not only here but in other locations, but I've seen some other theories about those dead cows, so it's possible they have nothing to do with this. Who did this? Why in this house? Were their intentions malicious? This scene, along with endless questions, will have to remain unsolved for now. While playing through the events of Dark Carnival, our group of survivors eventually come across a stage at the very end of the last level, belonging to a rock band that goes by the name of the Midnight Riders, who have also been brought up by our survivors through various voice lines, with Coach and Ellis being very vocal about their support, sharing stories and good memories they have about the band. However, after reading the wiki and analyzing the Midnight Riders, there's more than meets the eye to their story. In the final save from of the Dark Carnival campaign, there's some writing on the wall that mentions that the Midnight Riders were evacuated out by helicopter ahead of the general population, but the wiki never says why. Other writing in the safe room suggests it's because they had money and they were able to pay them off, but that's only speculation. The two most likely reasons are their popularity and wealth. The important thing to take away from the end of Dark Carnival is that they're alive. Where the true mystery of the Midnight Riders comes in is in another campaign, The Passing. While navigating through the infected city, if you come up to this particular fence, there's a chance you could catch a glimpse of their tour bus as it passes by. What is this bus doing here? Well, let's analyze the timeline a bit. The Passing takes place right after Dead Center, meaning it's the second campaign in the timeline. We know this because they have Jimmy Gibbs' car at the beginning of the level and drive off with it at the end. It's safe to say that not only are the Midnight Riders in this bus as it passes, but they are currently heading to the Whispering Oaks amusement park, in which they arrive and evacuate just as our survivors arrive at the carnival. The wiki mentions they refused to stop their tour due to the infection, which is why they attempted the concert at Whispering Oaks. The wiki also has their entire tour mapped out, and if we take a look at it, the Whispering Oaks tour was 5th to last, meaning even though they were evacuated, there's still a chance they're out there attempting to tour. That would be the hopeful answer, as their true fate is a mystery. I would love to see a campaign where we get to play as them. They have 4 male characters which could all be carriers. We know it's more likely for men to be carriers due to the way immunity works, so it isn't unbelievable that we could get an all-male cast. The very last tour location they had set up was Cleveland, Ohio, which would be a super interesting location for a campaign. Unfortunately, not much is known about their fate once they were evacuated. It's unlikely they would be able to resume their tour if they were under government protection. Will we ever see the Midnight Riders again? Are they even alive? Where are they at the end of the Left 4 Dead 2 story? This might remain a mystery forever. The next entry was from a fan who suggested I talk about this, so thank you to Artie the Shroom for your suggestion. They asked the question, what happened to all the wildlife in Left 4 Dead? This is something I never really thought of before, but it's an interesting mystery to try and solve, so let's try our best. When I think of wildlife, the first thing that pops into my head are the piles of dead cows you can find in Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. In the previous section, I mentioned you could find a pile of them in Blood Harvest, but you can also find some in the campaign Swamp Fever. As for the reason why their heads are skinned, that's a topic for a later date, but at least we have some type of animal that's tangible in-game. Another more niche example of animals in the games are birds. You can spot birds flying overhead on many different maps, and you can even hear them as ambience. Other than a few small examples, animals aren't really a big part of Left 4 Dead. If you want to use an out-of-universe reason, it would be because they don't have any reason to be added. The main focus of the game are the infected and survivors. Adding animals might take away from that. However, let's try and find an in-universe explanation. I've mentioned Blood Harvest quite a bit in this video, so let's jump back to that campaign. The entirety of this campaign takes place in a thick forest, so it isn't unreasonable that our survivors would come across something like a bear. My guess as to why you don't see a lot of prey animals is probably due to the most obvious reason, the infected. The infected probably tear apart any animals they can get their hands on. If they do it to humans, what's stopping them from just targeting a deer or a moose? Sure, they might not infect these animals, but they've probably killed enough of them in whatever areas our survivors enter, which is why those places are so void of life. The infected can be seen attacking each other and even killing each other. I think animals like bears would probably be able to defend themselves without any issues, but seeing a giant horde of 50+ infected sprinting towards you would be enough to scare off any animal. A little bit off topic, but do you know what would be a cool idea for a map? A zoo. Imagine our group of survivors entering an overrun zoo where tigers, lions, and even bears are attacking the infected. So you have these 3 different factions all at play, all trying to fight for survival. And it'd be cool if you could temporarily team up with a lion to take down the infected, but it's just a cool idea I had. The lack of animals in the base game always put me on edge, and until I started thinking about it, I always had this weird feeling that the world was missing something. That yes, the infected are killing people, but the world should still be full of life. But after talking about what we have, I can see that the green flu isn't just detrimental to humans, but to Earth's entire ecosystem. And while we don't have any concrete proof of infected attacking animals, I think it's safe to say they're in just as much danger as we are. This next one could be considered both a theory and a mystery, but let's discuss CEDA's true intentions for a moment. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this agency, but for the people in the back, it's an in-universe stand-in for the CDC. Like I've brought up many times in the past, throughout the world of Left 4 Dead, the players can find abandoned CEDA evacuation sites primarily in campaigns like the Parish. But has CEDA's intentions always been pure? If they are pure, are they changing? What about misinformation? The last question is a bit easier to answer. Yes, CEDA has lied to the public. Their biggest lie was titling the virus the green flu, because as everyone already knows, the virus is nothing like influenza, and if anything, it's more akin to something like rabies. Now, CEDA did this in an attempt to not cause mass panic, however, that's kind of unavoidable. The further the green flu spread, the more dangerous it got, which is why the military eventually took over, taking a more outrageous approach and doing things like bombing entire cities. Looking back at CEDA, besides lying to the public, what have they done to help? Well, they've given instructions on how to protect yourself by building things like safe rooms, and even providing advice on what to use to defend yourself. At the time of the Parish, the military is well aware that carriers exist. I point this out because a lot of fans say that they're trying to build a militia of carriers to fight off the infected. But how does CEDA play into this? CEDA's evacuation sites don't have any distinction between carriers and non-carriers. It's possible that CEDA evacuated carriers only to realize the damage they've caused. It's also possible that the military is ordering CEDA to only evacuate carriers in order to build this theoretical militia. If that's the case, I doubt any of our carriers they evacuate would be aware of such plans. Imagine you fight your way through multiple states only to make it to an evacuation site just to be forced to join some makeshift army. This whole militia theory could be a reason that the military has a protocol for carriers, as we see at the end of the Parish. Regardless of the role CEDA plays by the time of the Parish, they definitely lied to the public, so personally I wouldn't trust anything they say. At the beginning of the Dead Center campaign, you can find CEDA information regarding the Boomer, which is funny because by the time CEDA got this information, our Left 4 Dead 1 crew have already figured out every single infected. Regardless, CEDA has essentially failed, and so have their original intentions. But what do I know? Their intentions could still be a mystery. Like I've constantly brought up before, we need a third game. Not only could I get answers to all these theories, but the world of Left 4 Dead isn't crazy developed yet. Huge pieces of the overarching story are still unknown. With that being said, I do read almost every single comment, so if you have a mystery that you would like me to talk about, please let me know by commenting it. And if I use it, I'll shout you out in a future video. Please remember to join the public Discord server if you can. And again, if we hit 1,000 likes, I'll post some baby bunny pictures on my community tab. So make sure you're subscribed and you can see them on your feed. But have a nice rest of your day. Peace out.